Good morning. Welcome to the very first segment of Legal Talk with Tracy Sanders. So this production has been about 2 years in the making, but we finally made it here. I cannot begin to discuss my topic for today without first thanking my engineer, and also I want him to be my manager, Mr. Tony Sweet. So every powerful person or a person who is aspiring for power should have a person in their life who is their quote-unquote Yoda, right? That person that can provide guidance. So Tony Sweet has been that for me. He has answered my text messages early mornings, and he has also encouraged me to keep going. So I'm so happy to be here. And in addition to Tony Sweet in the studio today, we have some lovely studio guests. I'd first like to ask if Ms. Jan Perry could introduce herself.
Hi, how are you? I'm Jan Perry, and I am a candidate for Los Angeles County Supervisor in District 2 in 2020, running now, and it's great to be here.
We would love to support your campaign.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Next, we have Ms. Mishele Perkins.
Hello, my name is Mishele Perkins, and I am Ms. Tracy Sanders' intern for today.
She's also a college student, and she has a head full of beautiful natural hair, which we will discuss how natural hair is a current hot topic with respect to civil rights in the United States. And last but not least, my friend and also a wonderful supporter, Mr. Roberto Aguiar.
Hello, Tracy. Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Tell us more about yourself, please.
Well, my name is Roberto, and I was born in Connecticut and have lived in Los Angeles now for nearly 7 years, and I moved here from the great state of Florida. Sometimes the crazy state of Florida.
And you also have an interesting background in terms of South American roots.
Yes, I am a first-generation American born to parents who immigrated from Buenos Aires, Argentina.
Wonderful. And Roberto is going to help guide our conversation about marriage equality and a lot of legal issues today with respect to sexual orientation and how that fits into the civil rights conversation.
Thank you.
Are y'all excited to be here?
Yes.
Woo! Yes. Wonderful. So why don't we start our conversation with Ms. Jan Perry? Mm-hmm. How would you define the civil rights movement?
The civil rights movement is an ongoing process, a social movement, the change, the transformation in our society. I just finished a book about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it's about giving people opportunity. And he had a long discussion in there about economic justice versus economic parity. And in the end, his analysis is that there was no difference, and that everybody has to have opportunity and the opportunity to compete, the opportunity to have the basics, education, housing, a job, a way to be able to take care of your family. And these problems are still, these issues are still here, and we have made progress in some ways, but the incredible thing about the times in which we live now is it's almost like a bookend to what we went through as I saw with my parents in the 60s.
And that's a great point, because our next slide is basically a collage of civil rights, and it's discussing civil rights then and now. Sometimes it appears as if we made so many steps forward, but we sometimes appear as if we're going backwards. So I'm so happy that you mentioned it from a timeline approach. What you all see here today as well is a representation of generations. We should always discuss civil rights with respect to millennial generations. Your issues are possibly different than my generation, which is Gen X. And of course, we can never have a discussion without pioneers. So thank you so much for being here and for allowing us to have a multi-generational conversation. And with that being said, I'd like to ask Mishele. So Ms. Perry mentioned Martin Luther King and his readings and what he stood for as our leader. Tell me, what did you learn about Dr. Martin Luther King?
I think that most millennials, as myself, learned the basics of, Dr. King, that he was our leader and he was the way to go about things in a positive manner. And when you want something, you fight for it respectfully. and you make it happen. You do what you have to do, and what it takes to fight for equality.
Yes.
And that's a really big thing now with our generation, because even though the civil rights movement was, back then in that time, I think that we still kind of go through a lot of the things that happened then.
And I had mentioned earlier that you're my intern. You've helped me a lot with my brand in terms of natural hair and employment discrimination. And it's great that you mentioned then versus now, because back then, I'm pretty sure there weren't the same issues, because everyone apparently had, afros, and it was fight to power movement type of environment. I never thought that it would be an issue again in 2018, 2019. So it's really funny how we seem to go through the same issues over and over again. And the only thing I think we can do is learn those lessons and hope that we can keep moving forward. Now, in addition to natural hair issues and workplace issues and discrimination, also, in the current era in the United States, there are a lot of issues with respect to Latino, Latinx issues, and sexual orientation. So when I grew up as Gen X, we always kind of thought of civil rights as black and white, and especially since I grew up in the South, it was always black and white. But we can no longer see this as an issue of black and white. We have immigrants from all over the world coming in the United States, and I think it's very important to acknowledge that a large population of immigrants include Latin Americans, South Americans. So, Roberto, can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts with respect to the civil rights movement as related to national origin discrimination?
Well, I think that also one of the biggest issues that we have is just a lot of misinformation, miseducation, and people not understanding the distinction between, different people are coming from different countries that have different traditions, different customs, different cultures, even though they may share a language.
So that's a perfect point to stop and open up this discussion. The reason why I really wanted to include the Latino, Latina, Latinx discussion is because sometimes people do not understand the difference between culture and race. So
Absolutely.
Historically, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 included a discussion of race as a protected class. So race has historically been biological, genetic background and makeup, right? But you can have national origin, where you can have people of different genetic backgrounds, but they're still within the same culture. So how do you feel when people do not understand the difference between Black Hispanic, white Hispanic, or Latino, and now I've also seen recently Latinx. So could you kind of educate us about those different terms and how that makes you feel?
Absolutely. So, so Latinx is basically, so Latino refers to male, Latina refers to female, and Latinx is a gender-neutral term. So when you refer to someone as Latinx, it just means that is someone of Latin origin, but not specifying male or female. I think that there is a big, there are a lot of misconceptions regarding the difference between race, ethnicity, and nationality. And I think that sometimes people kind of get those things mixed up. And I think what happens a lot also is, we're in a country that is a self-proclaimed melting pot, right? We've all heard that before. But I also think that we're in a country that loves to put people in boxes. And when you have a lot of people, you need a lot of boxes.
Yes.
And so so we come up with all these words and these terms to label and categorize people. So, for example, I, am Hispanic, right? But Hispanic, the word itself, is very much so an American construct. My family back in their country is not walking around talking about how they're Hispanic. You know what I mean?
And you're referring to Argentina.
In Argentina, right. Or any country in Central and South America, people have, of course, racial categories, but again, Hispanic is very much so an American construct. Like, we've all seen those forms where you have to select your background.
On the U.S. Census box.
Yes, and you have, Black, white, and Hispanic, I think, are the first three that appear. But next to Black and white, there's always something in parentheses, and it says Black, not of Hispanic origin.
And that's to keep track of the population, but I'm glad you made the distinction in terms of natural origin and race, because I want the audience to realize Both are protected classes under Title VII of the Civil Rights Acts of 1964, but do not assume simply because a person is white or black, they can't also fit into a national origin category such
Absolutely.
as Latino, Latinx, or
Yes.
Hispanic. But I'd like to circulate back to Ms. Jan Perry. You mentioned something so important, and I think is great in terms of following up with the wonderful commentary provided by Roberto. Even though we have a melting pot in the United States, the beauty of Martin Luther King is even though he was African American, he has always been seen a leader of the people. His theme has always been unity and bringing us all together, the same way we're represented in the room. And so can you tell me a little bit more about your parents and that struggle to make sure that we all have rights that are protected within the United States?
Well, my parents are members of the greatest generation. This is the World War II generation. My father was a veteran, as were all of his brothers, and my uncle was a buffalo.
Wait, did you say the greatest generation? What about Gen X?
Well, that's how they're defined. That's how they're defined, as the greatest generation.
Okay.
It's not my term. That's how they're.
Oh no, we're enjoying your.
Tracy,
no,
you were alone in the room with your hand up. Anybody? Any takers? No.
No.
Please continue.
So,
Yes.
you know, they were very inspired. My uncle actually wrote in a book about Miracle at Santa Ana, which was a Spike Lee movie.
Yes.
He was a consultant on that movie, and in the book he wrote, as a young man, he wanted to go save the world from the Nazis. And of course, and then he said, I had to ask my father's permission first. But for this generation, they were very young. They got married young. They went and fought in other countries on behalf of this country. And the thing that's most remarkable, and my father and my mother talked about this a lot, is being treated badly in their own country when they came back. One of the experiences that I had with a member of the 92nd Infantry, a Buffalo soldier, his name is Ivan J. Houston, Staff Sergeant in the United States Army in World War II, is I went to Italy with him and his family, and I saw a woman come up to him, and she was an older lady with her grandchild in her arms, or possibly her great-grandchild, and she said to him, tearfully, this child would not be here if it weren't for you.
Wow.
Because, and that's powerful.
It's very powerful.
And it's global, and it's intergenerational, and these African American soldiers, these Buffalo soldiers, saved the lives of many people in different theaters.
And I'm so happy that you mentioned them, Ms. Perry, because unfortunately, it appears as if the Buffalo Soldiers in some instances have been written out of the history books.
Well, I think if we talk about it and we read the books and we share the information, we can keep their history alive,
Yes.
and they remain active to this day. So.
I'd like to also, as we go on to our next topic, because I want to give an overview of the different acts. We have the Civil Rights Act of 1964. We also have the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and then the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which protects against discrimination in housing.
Right.
So definitely want to go over those acts briefly, but before we do that, I would like to also mention you discussed Dr. Martin Luther King and your parents and their involvement in the movement. We recently had the Kingdom Day Parade here in Los Angeles. I think Mr. Adrian Dove is wonderful in terms of keeping that going. And is it true that the Kingdom Day Parade is the largest and the longest running in the United States?
I believe it is. The attendance is incredible, and now they get media coverage so people can see it from all over the country.
Yes, I watched it on ABC, and again, it's the unity theme.
Right.
People were there from around the world, and I think that is what is always important to remember about Dr. King.
Absolutely.
His message was power for the people and making America great. I didn't say again. So next, Mishele. Mishele, we would love to hear from you. Remember I mentioned that I never thought I would see the day. I grew up learning about afros and the 1970s and, you know, civil rights leaders that used their hair as a way to express power, even through music like James Brown and being proud of who we are. Are you shocked that in 2019, our hair meaning natural hair, people of African descent or textured hair, it could be any race. But textured hair may still be an issue in the workplace and schools. That's the first part of the question. Second part of the question, did you ever have any instances where you perceived that you had been treated differently because of your hair in the workplace or schools?
I am shocked that it's still an issue or a problem because we've come so far from other things, and for someone's natural textured hair to be an issue at any point in time, whether it's school, work, or anything, it doesn't justify for anything. I have been, I don't want to say fully like discriminated against because of wearing my hair. However, there are certain jobs that me wearing my hair like this is not acceptable. And there was an instance where I did have a job and where we had to put our hair completely covered. And due to the fact that my hair is fairly large and curly, it wasn't the easiest to put up and cover. And so there were, issues where it was, repeatedly I was being spoken to about, my hair this, my hair that. And then after work, if everyone sees my hair, they're like, oh my gosh, why does your hair look like this? How is your hair like that? I'm just like, that's just my hair.
So lucky for you today, as well as our audience that may be listening in, and we want you to listen in. Let's make this the top show at UB and Go, right? So lucky for you today, I'm going to basically give you a few tips in terms of the legal issues related to natural hair. But Ms. Jan Perry has experience in terms of workforce development, so maybe she can provide a few tips in terms of if you're interviewing, what to do, and if she thinks that perhaps we should consider changing our hair based on the industry. So I'll tell you very quickly, your hair appears to be natural, meaning it's your hair that is growing out of your scalp. So when you hear words such as the natural hair or the natural hair movement, it's natural hair that is growing out of your scalp. So if it is naturally your hair, there is no reason why you should feel as if it's going to cause you to lose a job opportunity. The reason why, as I had mentioned, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, natural hair, so long as it is your hair, regardless of your race, if it's the texture that you were born with, it's considered your biological genetic makeup. So if someone discriminates against your natural hair, that could possibly be a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, here's where it becomes a little bit tricky, and I am not going to look near Roberto because he and I are friendly and we make these jokes all the time. So in the entertainment industry, we really embrace, and I say we because I'm a lawyer, but I also speak in media and I'm in the entertainment world. We sometimes love wearing artificial hair. Like, I'm open about the fact that this is a wig, right? This is not natural hair. So if Tony were my manager and he really wanted to fire me because I'm annoying and I bug him all the time, and he wanted me out and I do not have a contract, I don't care if it's a wig, the fact that I'm annoying. If I am doing something that is not protected by a contract and this is not my natural hair, I can't claim Tony doesn't like me, he fired me because of my hairstyle or my race. If I had poor work performance, I'm annoying him, I'm annoying other employees, he could document that there are valid reasons to get rid of me as an employee. And I'm using that as an example. Don't get rid of me. But no, let's use the same example. If you're working for Tony and perhaps he doesn't like your hair either. So he doesn't like me, he doesn't like the wig, none of it. It's like Tracy has to go. And she's wearing a wig, right? But if it's the same scenario and he doesn't like your hair either, our scenario would be completely different. My hair, this wig is not protected. It's not who I am. It's not my biologics. Your hair is growing out of your scalp. It's genetically who you are. If he didn't like you and he didn't like your hair and he wanted you out, you technically, if you're able to document that your hair was also a part of the problem, you technically could have a Title VII civil rights claim, because the moment he doesn't like you, with all these other factors, including your big hair, now it's an issue. And I'd like for Ms. Perry to speak to this. The problem is most employers are smart enough not to say, I don't like you, and by the way, I don't like your hair either. Like, most employers are not going to do that. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. They'll find other reasons to get rid of you, but in the back of their mind, they might think, your hair isn't great for our business image, right? So let's focus on Mishele as a person with natural hair, not me openly admitting this is artificial. But if it is her natural hair and she believes that her manager doesn't like her, he's made comments about her big hair, aside from the law, what should she do in terms of workforce and professional development?
I think the main thing, especially if you're trying to get that first job or get your foot in the door, is to look professional, to look neat and professional, and however you define that. And there's probably a lot of variation between the industries. As you said, you and Roberto are in the entertainment industry. There's lots of creative people,
Yes.
and people express themselves just across the spectrum. Now, if you're going in for a job as an accountant,
Yes.
again, you got to look neat, professional, open, and if you're interacting with clients, study the company and see what their brand says or what image they're trying to portray, and then you have to decide whether or not you want to fit into that or not. Again, if the end goal is to get the job and to maintain your own personal
And then
integrity.
what about documentation? I know Mishele had mentioned in her real life story, the manager actually mentioned and made comments about the hair. I would say legally you should document any comments because that's evidence of possible discrimination. But what about those instances, Ms. Perry, where we might feel the person doesn't like us and we don't know if it's because of our hair? Because sometimes we can carry around an inferiority complex, regardless if we're white, Hispanic, or Black, whatever our race or background and national origin. Sometimes we have to take personal responsibility for the fact that perhaps we are insecure. So what about those instances where we don't know if it's our hair or the way that we look? What should we do?
I think it's important to be to try not to personalize things as much as possible in the workplace, and remember that work is work. And it's the opportunity to earn money, to make a living, and hopefully you're fortunate enough to be able to do work that you have a passion for.
Yes.
But it's always good if you feel that there's some sub-agenda going on there to keep notes, keep a log, something like that, and then keep reflecting back on it to see if there's some kind of a pattern. I know that in food service, if you're in food service, you probably do have to cover your hair for health reasons. And it's a health code requirement, I think, but you're the lawyer, not me.
Of course, it is. So that's a great question. And then we're going to move on to our next current topic, which is sexual orientation and distinguishing, which is a very hot topic in the workplace. We're not going into Me Too today, but we will discuss sex versus sexual orientation in the workplace. Now, with respect to the hairnets, Ms. Perry is correct, even though I go between two worlds. I'm right brain, left brain. I'm analytical, but I'm also creative. But in terms of analytical skills as a lawyer, absolutely. If you are in the food service industry, as well as law enforcement or any type of health services where your hair might be a health or safety hazard, the employer can absolutely request, demand, actually, that you keep your hair pulled up away from your face and not serving almost as a contaminant to affect other people. In terms of law enforcement, men or women with long hair, it could be a hazard. It could be a safety hazard for you because perhaps if you're giving chase, someone could actually use your hair as a weapon against you. So in those instances, it's not deemed as discrimination necessarily because you have an exception based on the fact that it's due to a legitimate workplace reason. So I hope that we've been able to help you, and you are an ambassador today for a lot of young people, regardless of race, who may feel that their hair has caused some type of friction in the workplace or schools. So thank you for your bravery in terms of speaking out. Next, we'd like to move on to Roberto. So you've heard the historical perspectives in terms of civil rights. You've also heard issues in terms of currently we're talking about hair and appearance in the workplace. Another hot topic is sex and sexual orientation. So we know that the Marriage Equality Act kind of made it a little more acceptable in terms of understanding that same-sex relationships do exist. A lot of people in certain parts of America still feel uncomfortable with that. And the reason why I say certain parts of America, always remember we are the United States, but what I find conservative versus more liberal. So, for example, California is known as liberal. But there are certain pockets in the Deep South where I come from, the Bible Belt, where people still do not feel comfortable discussing marriage equality, same-sex relationships, or just the idea that our traditional notions of marriage in this country has historically been man and woman. First of all, that's a lot of load on you. So I don't want you to feel as if you have to be our professor today and pick it all apart. Let's start step by step.
Okay.
With first, if you have ever been in a situation where you had to be a LGBTQ advocate, meaning educating people on what is lesbian, what is bisexual, what is gay, what is transgender, what is queer. I want to start there first because you would be surprised. Some people have no idea what the acronym stands for, and they don't know how to distinguish. So briefly tell us, what does it mean in terms of LGBTQ?
So the original is LGBT, right? Which is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, right? There have been, I feel like depending on who you talk to, there are letters added. I've heard as far as much as 8 letters. LGBTQIA.
And we don't have time to go
Yeah,
through
yeah,
all
yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
the different variations today. But generally, when you hear a discussion about, let's use lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, because today we're actually going to go through a judicial transgender opinion.
Okay.
Just give us a brief understanding of what it means in terms of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender.
The distinctions.
Yes, please.
Okay. So gay, well, technically gay is actually not a sexual orientation. Homosexual is a sexual orientation. Gay is a lifestyle.
Let's stop there. So did we hear that? And this is why it's important to have advocates to bring about awareness. Perfect.
Yes.
Continue.
Because there are people who are openly homosexual and define as such, but do not identify with gay culture.
So what about lesbian?
So having the G and the L, gay and lesbian, is a little bit redundant because lesbian refers to a gay or homosexual woman, a woman who's attracted to other women. So gay encompasses male and female, but lesbian is specific to women.
Okay, so stop there. Now, in the media, there have been a lot of discussion, primarily because of pop culture, and we're not going to go into naming celebrities who are transgender. I am not being sued. But let's not name call. So let's remember to not use any names or make any type of statements that could be defamatory or offensive.
Absolutely.
But transgender has gained a lot of momentum in the media because of pop culture.
Yes.
Briefly define transgender for us.
So as a person who is not transgender, I may not be the most qualified, but my understanding is a person who was born one gender yet identifies as another, which is why, and you may be more familiar with this than myself, in a lot of like civil rights legislation, I see that gender is listed as something that potentially could be used as something to discriminate against somebody, as well as gender identity.
Perfect. This is why I invited all of my esteemed guests, because we are in synergy. That was going to be my next statement.
Come through, synergy.
Yes. Zen. So in terms of civil rights legislation, just to bring it all home for it to make sense, we spoke about the history of civil rights. Title VII, 1964, employment discrimination, and you have Voting Rights Act, 1965, 1968, fair housing, right? So you have legislation through time.
Yes.
Where it is now, the Civil Rights Act is still in place, has not been amended, but there is controversy with respect to sex and sexual orientation. So the original intent of the legislation was sex discrimination, protection against sex discrimination. And back in 1964, sex was clearly defined as male and female. Now, here lies the point of contention today. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, which handles Title VII claims, has recognized sexual orientation to be included in the definition of sex. But as Ms. Perry will probably tell you, with the 3 levels of government, you can't have one level of government or one branch of government making a decision because we have judicial review. So the courts have not said necessarily sexual orientation is included in the legislation, but the agency, EEOC, a federal agency, has said, okay, if you are in the workplace and you have clearly identified as a person with a particular sexual orientation, primarily discrimination against people who have identified as lesbian, gay, transgender, etc., then you might have protection under Title VII. So right now, the law of the land is it's open to interpretation in terms of the statute, but the EEOC is clearly providing protection. So what that means for employers is if you are openly discriminating against someone based on sexual orientation, you could in fact be sued and that person could win. So it's not good workplace policy, but the amendment has not occurred to clearly define if it was intended in the legislation. So with all that being said, I love the fact that you had mentioned there is a distinction. And I will tell you, so many people in society are confused in terms of what is sex versus sexual orientation. I'm happy that we're brave enough to even discuss the topic today.
Absolutely.
A lot of people want to stay away from it because it's controversial, but as we know, it's not going anywhere. And as well as racial unity, we need to have unity with respect to sexual orientation. We just need to respect each other as human beings. So I'm happy you mentioned that. Now that we've had perspectives in terms of where we were then, where we are now, let's discuss where we're going. So, Ms. Perry, where do you think we should go in the future in terms of making sure rights are protected based on race, sex, sexual orientation, appearance in the workplace, which is covered under race, national origin, all these different protected categories? What can we do to make sure that our rights are protected in America, in addition to voting, and you are running for an office, right?
Yeah, I'm running for Los Angeles County Supervisor in District 2. I think it's important, and I'm happy to sit here with younger people, the millennial generation, to remember that society's changed, technology has changed, and so civil rights has become even more, again, retro in terms of still dealing with some of the many of the same issues, but then we have to face things like communities being left behind in technology, and if communities are left behind, then the people who live in these communities won't be able to compete effectively in the job market. As we face the issues of artificial intelligence, which is already here in many ways, and will affect the types of jobs we have, not only in the future, but in the immediate future.
Yes.
Both bad and good. There are opportunities there, public health, mental health, to serve the people, but also there's a great risk of losing jobs.
Yes.
And for younger people who are entering the job market, we have to make sure that they're trained to be able to confront these issues. This is going to be the civil rights, the technology civil rights issue that we have to grapple with.
I'm so happy you mentioned artificial intelligence. Would like to let you know, since we are discussing civil rights, actually there is an act, GINA, Genetic Information Act, which protects you against genetic information discrimination. So for example, now with artificial intelligence and technology, how this fits into civil rights, we now have technology in place where you can use different services to find out about your genetic background, predisposition to illnesses based on your family history. Unfortunately, some of that information is being stored and potentially sold, and companies can know more about you than you know about yourself. It could possibly affect job opportunities, insurance premiums. So that's a way where technology is definitely at an intersection with civil rights. Now, with that being said, there is legislation in place to protect against genetic information discrimination based on technology. But artificial intelligence, in terms of humans actually competing against machines. I think that you were very wise to say that. I mean, it's not Star Wars. It's already here. And I think that is the next frontier. So thank you for that. I'd like to ask Mishele, since you are my intern and ambassador for my natural hair brand, I like to follow the lead of Dr. Martin Luther King and other leaders in our community where we want to open it up to everyone. But with natural hair and the law, quite frankly, if a young woman has straight hair naturally, she probably wouldn't understand the struggle that we have as women with textured hair, or African American women who have coarse or kinky hair. And I said African American women with coarse or kinky hair because remember, some African American women are born with straight hair. So that's why you have to be very careful with only using race in terms of the discussion of hair and appearance in the workplace and schools. But in the interest of cute little brown girls who may look to you as a role model, what would you say to a young brown African American girl with curly hair who is being told that she is not good enough based on her appearance?
I would first start off by telling her that she is better than what they think or what they want to say. She's good enough for anything that she wants to do, and that the way she's made, that's her makeup, and she shouldn't have to change anything about herself because it's who she is. And if someone doesn't like the way she is, then that's their problem.
Perfect. And then this is a perfect ending to bring Roberto in. So she mentioned, we're beautiful, you're good the way you are. And I'm interpreting beauty in that because beauty is within the eye of the beholder. And beauty isn't always outside appearance, it's inside, and it's how we treat others. And I had mentioned that you and I have had a very good relationship, friendship, conversations. And what I like about the conversations that Roberto and I have, we're very transparent. He is of South American origin. I'm of African American origin. And we can discuss issues that some people might feel uncomfortable talking about. So I am going to ask, not being too transparent, but there is an elephant in the room. We know that even though we're talking about unity, sometimes within our communities of being, I don't like to use the word minority, but people of non-mainstream communities such as Latin Americans or African Americans, sometimes there is a perceived divide. How can we bring us all together to realize, as you said, you can be African American, Latin, you can have straight hair, you can have curly hair, you can be white, black, Hispanic. The importance is unity. And I want you to give us your take on how we can bring, in particular, because you're in the room, Latino people and African American people together to understand that we can work together to overcome discrimination that we both may face as groups in America.
Absolutely. Well, a few things with that. One of the ways I think that helps something that helps any cause, I think, is visibility. You know, as we briefly mentioned earlier, filling out the forms, with checking off the races and things. Next to black, you see not of Hispanic origin. Next to white, you see white, not of Hispanic origin. Because there are people who fall under the ethnic group that is Hispanic, but racially they're considered white, racially they're considered black, etc. There's a term that I'm not sure if you ladies are familiar with, but Afro-Latino, Afro-Latina, which refers to people who are Hispanic, 100%, but who are also of African descent, 100%. And it's important to mention that those two things can happen without the person necessarily being biracial, because I always hear, oh, so this person is mixed, or I don't know if you ever get that, oh, you have your hair so nice, oh, you must be mixed, or those kinds of comments. But visibility is big, because I feel like, what we always see are, in terms of the Latin community, we see the J-Los, we see the Sofia Vergara's.
I thought we mentioned we weren't going to use names.
I'm sorry.
But it's okay. Everyone knows J-Lo. Anyway.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
But yeah, so we see people that look a certain way,
With high visibility.
With people with high visibility, people that are more popular, more mainstream.
Yes.
And we don't see people that are equally part of the same group, but just not as common, not as popular. We just don't see certain there's not a lot of representation within the Hispanic group.
So once we have more visibility and representation and doing what we're doing here today with you, like you are a part of our conversation, we are learning from each other. I think that's a great example of how we can overcome perceived discrimination. Because I'd like to say in some instances, we have, even in Los Angeles, like people coexisting and living together, different groups that get along well. But every now and then you have that discussion of them and us. So I wanted to make sure that we all agree that we should be on the same page together. So as we wrap up today, for each segment of Legal Talk with Tracy Sanders, we have a daily word. So for civil rights then and now, the daily word is justice. And then after that, I'm going to end. I'd like to say, by the way, I am not a judge, but if anyone with the authority to hire me as a TV judge would like to call me, I'm open to that. But I am not a judge. I'm a lawyer.
Do you need a bailiff?
Oh, yes, I'll hire you. But I am going to end today with a judicial opinion. So that's why I'm wearing the judge robe, is because I'm going to end with a judicial opinion. But before I end with the judicial opinion, I want each guest one sentence. Tell me, the daily word is justice. How does justice relate to civil rights, in your opinion?
Opportunity given equally to all.
Thank you.
That was really good. I like that. Can I just quote that?
Yeah, sure, help yourself.
Concise.
Yes, exactly. Concise. Justice, I would say, for millennials and young people, I feel like is being accepted by everybody.
Wonderful.
Earlier we mentioned Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and I think he said it best in his letter from a Birmingham jail. He said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere."
We love Roberto, right? He always has the correct answers.
Can I be fan favorite? Hello.
You can't outdo the star of the show.
True.
Or her intern.
No, but we love you for that. And it's so important that you mentioned the Birmingham letters, and it is basically the quintessential concept of civil rights and justice in the United States. So thank you for mentioning that. I'd like to end with a judicial opinion. Please don't throw any tomatoes at me. This case is not accepted by a lot of people in America, but it is important that we know about it. So it's from the New York Times. It's dated January 22, 2019. The Supreme Court revives transgender ban for military service. So the judicial opinion that we're closing with today, and I'm going to ask each guest, all you have to answer at the end is agree or disagree. So it starts with the Supreme Court on Tuesday granted the Trump administration's request to allow it to bar most transgender people from serving in the military, while cases challenging the policy make their way to the court, right? So this is a ban. It could change, but for now, this is the way it is. I'll read a little bit further, and then I'm going to ask you to let me know if you agree or disagree with the opinion. The vote to lift two injunctions blocking the policy issued by lower courts was 5-4, with the Supreme Court's 5 conservative members in the majority. And then to wrap this up, the transgender policy, announced on Twitter by the president and refined by Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, is complicated, and there is some dispute about its precise effect and timing. But what you should know for now is the ban is in place, and this is an issue of imperative public importance because it is defining the authority of the U.S. military to determine who may serve in our nation's armed forces. Starting with Ms. Perry, agree or disagree with the transgender ban in the military?
Disagree.
Briefly, why?
Anybody who is willing to enlist and fight on behalf of our country should be allowed, period.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. Mishele?
I disagree as well. If you want to fight for our country, by all means, you should be able to fight for your country.
Roberto, please take a second because I know how you feel, but tell us.
I was gonna say strongly disagree. I think that ban is almost a form of punishing patriotism.
Perfect. And I do agree that it's punishing patriotism because, as you said, if you love our country and you want to serve, I too agree that you have the right to serve. We have 5 minutes remaining. I want to end with telling you how you can follow me. Please find me on Legal Talk with Tracy Sanders on Facebook and Instagram, and I also have a website. So if you want to purchase my book, a little bit of shameless self-promotion, Natural Hair in the Workplace, What Are Your Rights? You can purchase it on my website at www.legaltalkwithtracysanders. I would also like to thank our sponsors for today's segment. The Cochran Firm, California. We really are grateful for the Cochran Firm, California, for supporting the production from the inception. Also would like to thank Ada Aura Beauty Supply in Hawthorne and Vante Hair Products. Now, I have probably 3 minutes, so I want to ask Ms. Perry, please tell us how we can find you on social media and how we can connect with you if we'd like to volunteer or support your campaign.
Go to janharry2020.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Wonderful. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us on Legal Talk with Tracy Sanders.